everybody, thanks for joining us again for another video with Health Here, Help There. We've got Chaco Chiswell today. He's a certified exercise physiologist and kinesiologist who's going to be talking to us about balance and falls prevention.
Hello, my name is Chaco Chiswell and I'm going to talk about fall prevention from a balance perspective. So basically, a fall is an unintentional, unintended, uncontrolled fall to the ground, usually from high to low. So to prevent falls, you need good balance. So I'm going to talk about 3 strategies that control prevention of falling to the ground. So these 3 strategies are called ankle, hip, and step strategies. And then there's 3 systems in the body that control these 3 strategies. And these 3 systems are your vision, somatosensory, your body, and your vestibular. So I'll talk about those in a bit. So basically, the first thing you need to understand is what's called a sway envelope. So when I'm standing here like so and I begin to sway, if you imagine I'm standing in an ice cream cone, my feet are at the bottom of the cone, at the top of the cone is a circle. How far can I sway before I have to do something to prevent a fall? So if I sway too much, I'll start to fall. So basically, when you sway forward and backward, if you think about this as your bottom of your foot, there's a pressure. When the center of pressure is in the center of your foot, you're fairly balanced. As you begin to tilt forward, that center of pressure moves forward, and you feel the center of pressure increase in the balls of your feet. Something in your body says, oh, you're going to fall forward, and it brings that center of pressure back to the center. If you go too far backward, something in your body says, oh, you're going to fall backwards, and it brings that center of pressure to the center again. So this motion, this distance, is called the sway envelope. And with everybody it's a little different. As you age, it decreases. But say for me it's about 10 inches. So as I sway and I stay within my sway envelope, I can sway 10 inches forward, 10 inches backward, and I won't fall. I stay balanced. So the first strategy is the ankle strategy. So as I sway forward and backward, I'm pivoting around my ankles. Okay? So this is called in phase, in that my whole body moves forward together and my whole body moves backward together. And I pivot around my ankles. So I have about 10 inches there where I can safely pivot with the ankles. Okay? That's called the ankle strategy. So I'm standing on a bus and I'm just gently swaying, the bus is moving, and that's all I need, is the ankle strategy. The second strategy is called the hip strategy. So if I start to exceed the ankle strategy, my hip strategy will kick in. And you'll see this in people. If they start to sway too much, their hips start to move. So if I start to go forward too far, I pivot around my hip joint. My pelvis, which is basically my center of mass, my center of gravity, is this area, moves backwards to bring me back. So I sway forward, I sway, or I pivot around my hips, my pelvis moves back, and I'm balanced. So if I sway too far back, my pelvis moves forward, brings me forward. So this is out of phase. I'm moving back, but my pelvis moves forward. I'm moving forward, my pelvis moves back. So that's the hip strategy. The third strategy is the step strategy. And basically, if I exceed my sway envelope, if I exceed the ankle, if I exceed the hips, then I have to do something. I have to step. So the ankle, the pelvis, the hip strategy, and the step strategy are 3 ways that you maintain your balance in a standing upright position. So each one of those strategies is controlled by 3 systems. So the 3 systems are somatosensory, vision, and vestibular. The somatosensory system is basically my muscular system. It's proprioception. Where is my body in space? So as I'm moving, I keep getting signals through my nervous system of where I am in space, how fast I'm moving, how much I'm bending and rotating, flexing and extending around the joints. So if I begin to sway forward around the ankle, the somatosensory system says, oh, too far, bring that center of pressure back to the middle. If I sway backwards, somatosensory system says, hey, come back. The muscles will fire in the front to pull me forward, muscles fire in the back to pull me backwards. The vestibular system, the vision system, it's slower than the somatosensory system, but it's also the most dominant. So most people use their eyesight to control their balance. So when you walk through a room, your eyes scan the environment, it knows where things are, and it moves around them accordingly. So you'll see a lot of, say, elderly people, they're walking and they're looking where they're going because they're dependent on the visual system more than the other systems to control their balance. The third system is the vestibular system, and that's basically your inner ear. If you imagine a cup of water, if you tilt that cup, the water will flow forward. So if I tilt my body, my vestibular system flows forward, and it says, oh, you're not level, it brings me back to level. Tip back, the liquid tips, my body gets a signal, comes back to level. So, ankle, hip, step strategies, each one of those are controlled by the somatosensory, the visual, and the vestibular system. So basically, hello, this is Maya. She's going to help me demo. What I'm going to do is illustrate the ankle, hip, and step strategy and how you can use each one of the systems so you can bring in the visual system more or less, bring in the somatosensory more or less, bring in the vestibular system more or less, but working the ankle, step, and hip strategies. So if you could stand right there. So Maya just takes a stance. So she's just standing, because we're just talking about standing right now. We're not doing seating and we're not doing moving. Okay? We're just standing. So she's standing on 2 feet. Her eyes are open. So she's on solid ground, eyes open. If she begins to sway gently forward and backward, she's using the ankle strategy. So all 3 systems will come into play, basically in this position. Eyes open, solid ground. She begins to move. All 3 systems are in use pretty much equally here. If I get her to close her eyes and I take vision out, I'm going to now force her to use her somatosensory system and her vestibular system, but more somatosensory, less visual, because her eyes are closed. So I get her to sway forward and backward. So you can see she's just using the ankle strategy. So she's pivoting around her ankles. She has a sway envelope, so much distance. Now if she increases the length and the speed of the sway, so you increase the length and the speed, suddenly you'll see the hip strategy kick in. Okay? So she starts to increase the speed, the hip strategy. Another thing she can do is reach. She reaches for something, so reach a little bit more, a little bit more. You see immediately the hip strategy comes on. So she exceeds the ankle, she's reaching, and then the hip strategy shows up. Eyes are still closed, solid ground. If she exceeds her reach, and she keeps reaching, boom, in comes the step strategy. So if you're at home, if you put yourself in a corner, put a chair in front of you so you're safe, you close your eyes, and you just start to sway and pretend to reach for something, you will activate the ankle, hip, and step strategies. And you're going to activate the somatosensory control over those 3. So say you have a vision problem and you wear thick glasses, or you've got macular degeneration or glaucoma, some kind of vision impairment. I want to really make sure your somatosensory system is activated and the tuned up as good as it can, because you're going to rely on that, because you're relying less on vision. So the next system that we want to activate, I will put Maya on these foam blocks. So now she's not on solid ground, so the somatosensory now is reduced. It's compromised. She doesn't have solid ground to feel. What she's feeling here is movement. It's unstable. Okay? Her eyes are now open. She keeps her eyes open. She begins to sway. So what this does is it activates the visual system. She can't rely on sensations now accurately from the ground because the surface is unstable. She begins to sway forward and back. Her whole body moves. She increases the distance and the rate. Eyes are open, so now she's using visual. Suddenly her hip strategy kicks in. If she pretends to reach for stuff, then you'll see the hip strategy, ankles exceeded, hip strategy shows up. If she overreaches, then boom, there's a step. So now we're using the visual system because not on stable ground, eyes are open, swaying and reaching to bring in the ankle, hips, and step strategies. The third system, the vestibular system, is we keep you on an unstable surface, but now we close the eyes. So now eyes are closed, so vision's gone. You can also reduce vision, dim the lights, put on sunglasses. But in this situation, her vision is gone because she's closed her eyes. Unstable surface, somatosensory is now reduced, and she begins to sway. Now her sway envelope is shrunk. Before she could do more, now she's doing less. Ankle strategy being used, vestibular system to control that being activated. She begins to increase her rate of sway and distance. Hip strategy shows up. She begins to reach. She begins to reach. You can see the hip strategy shows up. If she exceeds her reach, boom, step strategy. Just a second. Go in there. So she exceeds her reach. Eyes are closed. Exceed the reach. Step's going to show up. So basically, I'll talk a little bit how you can practice these at home. I mean, the benefits are vast. Basically, falls are the leading cause of why anyone would show up at a hospital across most age groups, especially over the age of 65. So fall prevention is crucial. Usually children, they'll fall a lot, but they just get up and walk away. As you age, and if you fall, you usually end up fracturing a bone. Hip breaks are very serious if someone is older and falls to their side. So how can you practice this at home? The first thing you want to practice is just standing and swaying, because the swaying works that center of pressure as it moves from your toes to your heel to the toes. So when you move backwards, if you exceed before you exceed, your toes start to come up. So who hasn't felt this sensation of sort of tipping and their toes are coming up? Because that's activating the muscles in the front of your body to pull you forward. Right? So if you exceed that, you have to step. So if you picked a wall in your home and you stood close to the wall and you put a chair in front of you, what I can do is I can find my sway envelope. I sway back, I hit the wall immediately. So I go a little bit forward, I sway back, oh, there. If I was further away right now, I would have to step. So I can just touch the wall. You can see my toes are coming up. So this is my range. I go forward, I move the chair basically right about there. So now I can practice this sway, touch the wall, touch the chair, and I can just feel that center of pressure moving on the bottom of my feet. If I go too far forward, my heels come up, and I start to activate my hips, and then if it's too much, I step. So a chair in front, wall behind, that allows you to exercise that sway in a safe place. Use your hands, you can just touch the wall. And you don't want to sort of fall into the wall and lean, because then you haven't really exercised that system. So you find your range, you go back, feet in the air, toes in the air, you touch, go forward, touch the chair, come backwards. So I've got eyes open on solid ground. Okay? So that's working all three systems fairly equally. If you want to increase the risk, I can stand on a cushion and do the same thing. Say you had a cushion, just a pillow will work in a home. Anything that isn't, solid ground. So I now need to move closer to the wall because on the foam, my sway envelope decreases. It's less stable. So I find a place for the foam. And also, incidentally, on the foam, you can see how my heels and my toes are hanging over the end. That makes it less stable also. Okay? If I was this way, I'd be much more stable. Okay? And foam, too. This is high-density foam. If you have softer foam, of course, it's much more. Okay? Don't stand on your cat. Okay, so here I am swaying. So if I do this with my eyes open, I'm going to activate my visual system. Remember, I can also close my eyes, and then it becomes a lot more somatosensory, and you can see, suddenly people become more shaky, they usually lower their center of gravity, it's much more fearful. And that brings up another topic entirely, is why is the person having difficulty? You have to sort of figure out, because a lot of people have, if they have had a fall, they have fear of falling. So they may be fine, their systems may be fine, but they're just really scared to do this. So you have to give them progressions that will overcome that fear of falling. They might also have very weak lower legs. So you might have to practice something like chair squats to build the strength in the lower leg. If that's difficult to go down to the chair, you bring the seat up so you don't have as far to go. And this is probably the single best exercise you can do is squats, because that's a very functional exercise for everything in your life. But it also builds your leg strength so that your stepping strategy and so on are much better. And then finally, of course, you're on compliant surface, eyes closed, that's the vestibular system. Increasing the rate and how far you start seeing this show up. If you feel safe, you should risk, but if you feel safe, you get rid of the chair, move the foam block away, and this is when you can start to work the step strategy. Okay? So if I could bring Maya back in here. If I was working with Maya in the gym, I could put her on the foam, and I can use what's called manual perturbations. And I can begin to just press and push. Because if you think about it in real life, you walk on uneven ground all the time. Maybe you're walking a dog, the dog pulls you, you're with a child, holding their hand, they pull you, groceries, etc. They're asymmetric, it's uneven. The grass changes, you're on dirt, slopes, wind, etc. So those are called perturbations, and they move your body in unpredictable ways. So an advance would be for me to start to perturb her so that I can get her to kick in different strategies. You'll notice she went up on one leg there. That's very advanced, is to work these strategies on one leg, like the hip and so on. So she's on 2 feet. I begin to perturb her, and I can put a belt around her waist and hold on to the belt so it's safe, so she wouldn't fall if it's in, say, an older client or someone who's injured. Okay? So perturbations. So at home, you basically practice falling. I'm going to pretend that I fall. So that's like a perturbation. I can pretend to fall sideways. There's a step strategy shows up. I begin to fall. This is the hip strategy showing up. I've exceeded ankle, hip, But if I'm weighted on this leg, another step shows up called the cross step, where I throw my leg out. Okay? And you can design exercises to work side steps, cross steps, diagonals, backwards, forward. Backwards is the hardest. When people fall back, very common for people to end up hitting the ground. So designing exercises for people to fall back, they activate the hip strategy and then the step. Because most people, they just start to fall, suddenly they feel very fearful and they just flounder and then they fall. So getting that step strategy in play is very, very important, very, very useful.